Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today is going to be the first video in the Cape Biology Unit 1 playlist that I'm making. And the topic we're going to be looking at today is water. So we're going to start off by looking at water on a molecular level. We're going to try to understand the hydrogen bonds and the polarity that water has. And when we're done looking at water on this micro scale, we're going to look at how the microscale affects the major properties of water that facilitate life. This, what you're seeing on the left-hand side of your screen, is a water molecule. And there's a lot more going on here than you might first think. So you have the oxygen in the middle that's bonded to two hydrogens in a covalent bond. So what happens in this covalent bond is that hydrogen donates one electron and oxygen donates one electron, and they share them, and the electron density is in between the hydrogen and the oxygen. However, it's not shared completely equally. Because the oxygen has more protons, it is more electronegative, and it draws the negative charge closer to it. So we get what's called a delta negative charge by the oxygen. Conversely, since hydrogen has less protons and does not attract the shared electron pair as well, it develops a slightly positive charge that we call a delta positive charge. And that is what we're seeing with those little delta signs by the molecules. The next thing that we want to look at is the bond angle. So as you can see there, water has a 104.5 degrees bond angle. And this is important for Cape because they might ask you exactly that figure. And we want to know why it has this bond angle. So we can see the four black dots are two electron pairs on top of the oxygen, and these lone pairs repel the hydrogens away from themselves so that we get this 104.5 degree angle. So we established just now that oxygen has delta positive hydrogens and a delta negative oxygen. And when you have a dipole like this, what happens in water is that you get hydrogen bonds. And what a hydrogen bond is the positive hydrogen from one water forms a hydrogen bond with a delta negative oxygen in another molecule. And as you can see from the diagram, one water molecule can form four hydrogen bonds. And these hydrogen bonds by themselves are weak, but in water there's so many hydrogen bonds that it becomes a strong force collectively. And what hydrogen bonds do is they give a couple anomalous features to water that make it especially suitable for life. Hydrogen bonds ensure that water is denser than ice. And you might ask, how is water denser than ice? Because usually, in a solid, the molecules are bonded close together and the solid is the most dense state. However, in water, we have ice, which you can see the molecular structure of on the first diagram, where you have these rigid hydrogen bonds that don't break, the hydrogen bonds between the hydrogen and the oxygen. And they create a lattice that has hexagonal empty spaces. And because it has this lattice with this fixed shape, there's lots of empty spaces in between the molecules. Whereas when you look at water on the circle on the right-hand side, the water has hydrogen bonds that are constantly forming and breaking and interacting. You have water molecules that are sliding over each other, getting up real close. So because it does not form a lattice like ice, and they're allowed to get so much closer together, liquid water is actually denser than ice, and that is why ice floats. So water is actually densest at 4 degrees Celsius, and this is important for aquatic organisms like fish, because when you have winter time and you have a top layer of ice above a lake, the below layer does not freeze. So you have a top layer of ice, and this ice insulates the water below. And you have 4 degrees Celsius water at the bottom because it's dense. And this can allow the aquatic organisms to migrate to warmer waters or to survive. Because if water was the same density as ice, or if ice was more dense than water, the entire lake would freeze over and life would not be able to survive. The next anomalous feature of water is its high specific heat capacity. So other liquids usually have a lower heat capacity than water. And you might ask, what is a heat capacity? So the specific heat capacity is the amount of energy that's needed to raise the temperature of 1 gram of liquid by 1 degree Celsius. And this is really high for water because of the hydrogen bonds. Because there's so many hydrogen bonds, it requires more heat energy to break than a normal liquid would. Because it takes so much energy in heat to change water by 1 degree Celsius, this means that water has a relatively constant temperature. And this is important for living things because living things need to maintain a constant body temperature so that the enzymes can work. Slight or moderate fluctuations in temperature can cause enzymes to stop working and the organism may die. So another feature of water, similar to specific heat capacity, is the high latent heat of vaporization. And when we talk about latent heat of vaporization, all we're talking about is the energy in heat required to turn water from liquid to gas. And this is important because when water turns from liquid to gas and leaves our skin, it has a cooling effect. And this is why we sweat. So because it takes so much heat, water is a great coolant for our bodies, and also for plants when they transpire or carry out transpiration, it also has a cooling effect. Another feature that water has is a high latent heat of fusion. And we just said that latent heat of vaporization is the energy taken to change water from liquid to gas. Well, the latent heat of fusion is what? Leave. Go. The latent heat of fusion is the energy and heat required to change a liquid from liquid to solid or vice versa. So this is important because it takes a lot of energy for water to change form. So this prevents ice crystals from forming inside cells. And we don't want ice crystals forming inside cells because these damage the cell machinery so much. These can puncture cell walls, these can puncture cell membranes, these could destroy organelles, and there's all of these stuff that we really don't want. And another thing that promotes water staying in its liquid form is the presence of solutes. Because salts like NaCl, the ions from this can get in between the hydrogen bonds and prevent it from linking up to form ice crystals. So this is also important that we have solutes in the water in our cells. So we just looked at a bunch of properties that water has because it has hydrogen bonds. Now we're going to look at some properties that water has because it's polar. So water as a solvent. So water is a really good solvent for polar molecules. If you ever heard in school, your teacher might have said like dissolves like. Polar molecules dissolve polar molecules. Polar solvents dissolve polar solutes. And this is important because for there to be a chemical reaction in the body, it needs to be in liquid form, in a solute. So water is often a solute. So water can dissolve many things that are polar, like glucose, or polar molecules. So when we have the salt, or the molecule that's dissolving, we call this a solute. The water is a solvent, and it's collectively known as the solution. And we need molecules to be in solution to react. So another property of water that's important is its surface tension and its cohesion, and this is because of hydrogen bonds. So cohesion is a force that allows water molecules to stick together and move by mass flow. Mass flow is just the undisturbed movement of water as a single stream. And this is important for the phloem and the xylem, up the xylem in a single stream. And also we have the little picture of the pond skater here, where the surface tension of water allows organisms like the water strider, or pond skater, whatever you want to call it, to be able to survive and remain on top of the water in calm ponds. This feature of water that we're looking at is the pH and reactivity. So water has a neutral pH. pH is just a measure of the acidity, and it goes on a scale from 0 to 14, where 0 is very acidic and 14 is very basic. And we have water, which is a relatively neutral pH. And this is important because many cells require a neutral pH for their metabolic reactions to occur. And besides having that neutral pH, water can also act as a reactant in hydrolysis reactions in the body. And a hydrolysis reaction is just like it sounds. Hydro is where water is involved, and lysis is to break things apart. So in a hydrolysis reaction, water is used to break things apart. So we have this diagram here at the bottom, which is showing the chemical reaction between starch and water, where water breaks apart starch to form glucose. And this is really important. Okay, so that was the end of the video. I'd like to thank you all for watching, and stay tuned for more videos to come.